Hello. So today we're going to be learning on Tzadik Hey Amud Aleph. The mimer is Chayv Inis Lebesumei בפוריא ad layada ben Ar Haman Barach Mordechai. So this mimer is going to be discussing the nature mostly of Amalek. So the pasuk says Ki yad al kesah, that their hand, the hand of Amalek, is on the throne of God, and the says in Chazal that Amalek prevents God's throne from being complete. So the Alter Rebbe says to understand this, we need to quote the pasuk that says that the Amalek is the beginning of the Guyim, Rishis Guyim Amalek, V'achrisi Ade Avad. That Amalek is the beginning of Guyim, and Amalek's end will be destruction. So the Alter Rebbe says that the pasuk is alluding to the fact that when it comes to Amalek, there's a sense of beginning, and in a sense, Amalek is also the end. So the Alter Rebbe explains that when it comes to Kedusha, we know that we have a beginning and end, because God, it says, Ani Rishon Vani Achron, God says, I am the first and I am the last. The Rishon being Soveb Kol Almin, and the last being Mamleh Kol Almin. But when it comes to Klippa, similarly, Lahavdil, Amalek also has a beginning and an end. In one sense, Amalek is the head of the Goyim, because we know that every nation of the seven nations represents a certain evil trait, and Amalek is the head of all of them. And as well, Amalek is the last of them in the sense that he is the lowest, the ultimate, the worst level of Klippa. And we find that Amalek represents the strength of all evil, the ability of evil to last. Which is the sense of the Rush of Ra'leh. Ra means both Ra l'shamayim v'Ra l'briyos. That Amalek brings with him, the way the Alter Rebbe phrases it, is a sense of disgustingness, a sense of real twisted evil, and the strength of evil, the perpetuity of evil, which he says is like the poison of a snake, which is why Amalek is often referred to as a snake. Now, the other factor of the beginning and end of Amalek is that he's the Reishisai, because in the sense that Amalek also gives birth to all evil. So we focus this around the pasuk that says V'lei ra amal b'Yisrael, that Bilam says that I don't see perversity among the Jews, but where do we see perversity? We do see it in the words Amalek Amalaka, that Amalek is the quintessence of perversity, and that perversity is what prevents is what blocks godliness and what prevents God's name from being complete. So the Alter Rebbe begins to explain this. What does it mean that God's name is kept incomplete? What's the damage that Amalek inflicts upon the Jewish soul? So he says that we know that the Jewish soul is made up of six emotive attributes, which are of course paralleling the emotive attributes of God, and which in the name of God are represented by the letter Vav. So in the soul there's chesed, which is the inherent love that every Jew has for God. This is the inherent natural love that every Jew has to connect to God. We then have gevura, which is that once we choose to connect to God, the next thing we do is contemplate His greatness, and in contemplating His greatness, we immediately have a reaction of awe. And Alter Rebbe gives a few examples of this. He says it's like the malachim that respond with awe when they perceive godliness. Their first response is that they're einim be'ema ubira, that they respond, they react to God's greatness with this sense of awe. And as well, we have this at Matan Torah, that after it says that the Jews experienced the thunder and lightning, after they experienced the grandeur of the divine revelation that was Mount Sinai, the immediate response of the Jew was awe, was fear. It says that they jumped back, and we know that the left side is the side that pushes away, small deicha. That when one thinks of God and thinks of the greatness of God, there's a certain sense of a reaction of awe and a sense of distance. But stresses the Alter Rebbe, to be clear, this is not a complete distance. This is a partial distance. It's a sense of distance that reflects awe. And what allows us to experience the duality of both our chesed, our passionate love for God, and our subsequent fear of Him? That's tiferes. That's rachmanis. That Yaakov has the ability. We have Avram being chesed and Yitzchak being gvura, and Yaakov is the joiner. Yaakov is mavriach ben הכסא al הכסא. That he connects these dual experiences, and Yaakov makes that connection of combining those two. Now, in Seder, we have these traits in Seder Shalshalos, and we also have these traits in our own service of God, because these three traits represent Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chesadim. So which these three traits together prepare us and allow us to engage in a service of God that is both joyful and glad. So beginning with Gemilas Chesadim, which is of course tzedakah, then there's Avodah, which the Alter Rebbe says is he begins by saying that he quotes the pasuk that says Tachas asher layavadta b'simcha. So he says that the Avodah is the Avodah of serving God with conscious gladness, and finally there's Torah, which is halacha. And so once again we have these three. We have the two sides, the two extremes, and the component that brings the two extremes together. So the Alter Rebbe says that the framing of this is the pasuk B'yaminai eish das lamay. It says that from your right hand you drew a fiery Torah to them. So the right hand, of course, once again refers to tzedakah, refers to chesed. The eish, the fiery Torah, the fire refers to refers to gevura, refers to the left side. And here the Alter Rebbe interprets it as the Avodah of tefillah, that the main component in davening is Kabbalas Ol Malchus Shamayim, which is the fear of God and recognizing that we are standing in front of God. And the Alter Rebbe gives a hispainus. He says that when you reflect upon the fact that you are standing in front of God, you immediately a fear comes upon you, and this is a great and intense fear of reflecting on the fact that although God is infinite, and although God is obviously not bound by creation, He nevertheless fills creation, and all of creation is imbued with His greatness. And so this hispainus causes the average Jew to then feel a very strong fear, a very strong awe of the Eibishter. Now, this Kabbalas Ol Malchus Shamayim then translates into Kriya Shema, and the Alter Rebbe sets up the duality of the first and second parsha of Shema. We begin with Shema, we then have V'ahavta, and then we go straight into the second parsha of Shema. So we in the microcosm we have Shema Yisrael, which is the passionate love for God, and the Kabbalas Ol Malchus Shamayim of Baruch Shem. And then in the macro we have V'ahavta, which is the passionate love for God, and V'haya, which is kind of the rigid fear and awe of God. Now what the Alter Rebbe says is that setting ourselves up that by loving God we are then almost as a matter of course drawn to fear Him. As it says that after Avram has Yitzchak, it says that Yitzchak is Avraham's son, and the way that it's taught in Chassidus is that it's not just that Yitzchak follows Abraham, but that Yitzchak is a natural conclusion to the service of Abraham. That when we have the service of Abraham, this automatically leads to a Yitzchak, in the sense that it's not that Yitzchak was a conflict to Abraham, but that the two of them together represented the oneness of God, in that both of them together were combined to form the more perfect service of the Eibishter. Now, practically, what this plays out to is karbanos, that the fire that came down into the mizbeach came in the form of a lion, of an aryeh, and aryeh has the same letters as yira, And once again, this theme of fear. Now, as well, this translates into the service of the Levium, that the Levium sing to the Eibishter, and the Levium also serve in a way of yira. What the Levium and what the Karbanos do is they were presenting to God our faults and our flaws through the Karbanos and through the songs of the Levium, and the Karban lifts up lifts that up, elevates that, and consumes that, and imposes upon our relationship with materialism divine revelation. Now, and this is and coming back to our Eish Das Lamei pasuk that we mentioned before, this is the Eish component, the fire component. Now, the Das, the Torah, is of course is the Torah itself. Torah is Torah's emes, and emes is a word that begins with aleph, ends with taf, and has a mem in the middle, which covers the whole aleph base from beginning to end with the very middle, and it's the idea of emes carrying through from beginning to end. So Torah takes these two extremes, takes the miyaminai, and takes the eish, takes the chesed, and takes the gevura, and provides the bridge between them to bridge these two extremes. And this is this is also, as we said before, the trait of Yaakov of titin emes liYaakov. And the end of the pasuk saying lamai is the idea that this becomes a deeply personal mission of the Jewish people. We are given the Torah as a means of bridging this gap for ourselves. Now, bringing this analogy back to the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, to the name of God. So these Vav Midas, which was of course Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, and then subsequently Netzach Yisod, which the Alter Rebbe doesn't explicitly mention, but is a double of Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. So these Vav Midas are of course represented by the letter Vav in the Shem Havayim. So the Alter Rebbe is going to do an analysis of the structure of those letters, or the physical form of those letters. So we begin with the letter Hey. Hey is made up of two lines down and one line across, which represents which machshava, dibur, and maisa. The two lines that connect are machshava and dibur, and the line that is disconnected is maisa. Machshava and dibur remain a part of our nefesh, and maisa is something that is outside of us, like this line which is disconnected from the rest of the Hey. Now, the goal in the Shem Havaya service is to connect the Vav to that final Hey. Right? So you connect Yud K, Vav K. That last Hey. That our goal is to translate the emotional service of God, the Vav service of God, the Midah service of God, into the practical thought, speech, and action of that final Hey. But the Alter Rebbe says that there's two perspectives on Hey. Because the letter Hey can be spelled two different ways. It can be spelled with Hey Hey, and it can be spelled Hey Aleph. So the Alter Rebbe says that when it's spelled Hey Hey, in that sense, this is machshava, dibur, u'maisa, being from the perspective of machshava. Right, so it still remains personal. It still remains a part of the neshama. Whereas when Hey is spelled with an aleph, so the letter aleph also spells the word pella, and the word pella connotes the idea of something arriving without having any source, in the sense that that it's untraceable, in the sense that it is so removed from its source that it's almost impossible to recognize where it came from. And so the idea of Hey spelled with an aleph is the lowest service. In other words, in a practical sense, this means the machshava, dibur, u'maisa that is totally removed from a service of God, and that our job is to connect that vav to that Hey. But the Alter Rebbe stresses the fact that this, at its source, Vav He is actually much higher than Yud Ke. So, and the Alter Rebbe explains. He says that the Yud in Yud Ke, so the Yud is a dot. The Yud is a spark. The Yud is something that seems to come from that brings about creation. It brings about the me'ayin liyesh. It brings about from the nothingness, so to speak, of God, from the infinity of God to make creation, and it belies the fact that the being that it continues to be just one spark. It is a reference to the fact that from God's perspective, creation remains, in a sense, almost insignificant. The Hey is the expansion of the thought of the Yud, so it is the expansion of creation, but it's still from the perspective of God. And the way that the Alter Rebbe phrases it here is that Yud, the Yud in Yud Ke defines the relationship, and Yud is the quintessence of bittul. Yud represents absolute bittul, and what that means is that in this first version of Hey, of the Yud Ke, in the first version of Hey, it is a machshava dibur u'maisa, but it's all from the perspective of kedusha. It's all from the perspective of bittul. And in that sense, when the Yud Ke dominates the relationship, or from the perspective of the Yud Ke, even the Vav Ke, even the lower steps in the process, also have the sense of bittul. But on the other hand, if one wants to serve God with their natural love of God, in other words, if one wants to engage in a relationship that's not from the perspective of the Eibishter, but from our perspective, not from the Mashpia, but from the Makabel, then we need to operate actually on a Vav He level. And what that means is that we actually experience our Ava, we actually experience our emotions, we accept our reality as reality. But the Alter Rebbe says that when we do that, we expose ourselves to tremendous risk. We expose ourselves to the possibility that we are going to be consumed by our own ego. Because we're thinking of these things from our perspective, we're going to be consumed by our own ego, by klippa and sitra achra, and we are opening up the possibility that our traits can now be used for evil. And this, says the Alter Rebbe, is where Amlek shines. Amlek senses that ego, and the potential for ego that exists in this Vav Ke service, and he takes advantage of that. And what he does is he disconnects the Yud Ke from the Vav Ke. He allows the possibility of that service to be detached from the bittul of the divine reality that Yud Ke represents. And in this sense, Amalek is the beginning of all evil. He is the creator of all evil, because he creates the idea that there can be evil. He creates the idea that there can be something separate from God, that there can be ego that distinguishes us from the Eibishter. As it says, "Ein adam avera elam ki nichnas by ruach shtus." This ruach, this sense of folly, is a sense that that God is hidden, that God is covered, and in that it also covers over our own potential for bittul. And in this sense, the name of God remains incomplete. Now, this also brings us to what the rest of the Maimer Chazal is, that his name is incomplete, and the throne of God is incomplete, because the pasuk says case ka, that both God's throne is, instead of being spelled chaf samach aleph, it's just spelled chaf samach. So just like the name has been cut off, so too God's throne has been cut off. And instead of being case ka, instead of being kisei, it's case ka. The aleph that Amalek has taken away is alefcha chachma, alefcha bina, and this is the idea of Torah at its source, because Torah at its source is, of course, pure Eibishter. Torah at its source is chachma. Torah at its source is complete humility and a complete connection to God. The Torah, however, descends down into the world, and it becomes enrobed in physical realities and physical contexts. And just like a throne, that in order for somebody to sit on, they need to put their back into the throne. They need to actually put the lowest part of their body sitting in the throne. So too, for the Torah to come down to us, it takes a so to speak, a compromise of the fact that Torah needs to be nislabish in the lowest forms of reality, in the most chitzonius forms of the Eibusher's creation. And so when the Torah descends into the physical world, it it gives room for that disconnect. And this is why Torah, this is the reason for the stress that Torah has to be learned, Torah has to be learned lishma. That when we learn Torah lishma, we, so to speak, redeem Torah. We allow Torah to be down here while still retaining its connection to the Eibusher. And this is the service that Amlek renders, where Amlek fights this and seeks to distinguish and to separate between the Eibusher and his creation, and to take away the aleph from the case. So the Alter Rebbe says, what is the advice, right? How do we fight Amlek? So going back to the original pasuk, it says ki yad al kaseh, that his hand is on the throne of God. So the Alter Rebbe says that we have to fight it says that the hand is clearly something that transcends both case and ka, and in that sense is able to hold it. So the Alter Rebbe says that in Tanakh we find the word hand mentioned in 3 different ways. We find the phrase yad hagadela, yad hachazaka, and yad harama. So yad hagadela, it says that the Biyar Yisrael say yad hagadela, that the Jewish people saw the great hand of God, and this is a recognition of God's greatness. This is a perspective wherein we meditate on the greatness of God, and what this elicits in us is a great desire to be bonded to Him and to connect to Him. Then there's the yad hachazaka, and yad hachazaka is a sense not of the delight of Judaism, but the awe, and the fear, so to speak. And what this elicits in us is a desire for Kabbalah soul, a desire to subserviate ourselves to God. And that's why we say in Shemona Esrei, Slach lanu v'nu ki chatanu, machal lanu malkeinu ki fashanu. So there's a very big difference between the idea of sin and the idea of pesha. It says that pesha is the concept of rebelling. Pesha is the concept of being merid b'malchus, is the sense of prikas all. And what this leads to, says the Alter Rebbe, is the phenomenon that somebody can daven Shemona Esrei and somebody can dedicate himself to the Shemona Esrei. However, he is not being necessarily sincere enough. And what this produces is the phenomenon that after Shemona Esrei we can go about our day and we can be engaged in the world and we can disconnect from our previous level of dedication. And for that sense, we say that that our struggle is going to be one of Kabbalah's all. We recognize that our struggle is this idea of being married all malchus shemayim, and that we want help. We want to grow in our ability to be makabel all malchus shemayim. And this is a sense in our souls that we feel this possibility, and that we want to engage in this in growing through this. And finally, we have the Yad Rama. But when it comes to Yad Rama, the Alter Rebbe points out an interesting thing, that when we say Yad HaGadela and Yad HaChazaka, but when it comes to Yad Rama, there is no Hey, which is Hey Ayidia, is the idea of this thing being identifiable, and in a sense of this thing being independent. That when we're Yotzim Biyad Rama, we leave with this mighty hand. And the idea of leaving is the idea of leaving our own limitations, that the neshama responds to the call of God, that God raises us up, and this is tshuva ilah, as it says, as Chazal say, tshuva kadma la'ilam, because tshuva that comes from the depths of the heart, tshuva that comes with a sense of real mesiras nefesh, to return to God and to return to our place, and our place is of course all over machshava. Our place is divine is God's mind, in that sense, we transcend even creation, because that creation was a thought of God's, and Yisrael precedes that thought, as we also find the Gemara that says that God consulted the Jewish souls as to whether or not He should create the world. And when we do tshuva, what we're saying to God is that we want to return our neshamas back to that state. We want to return our neshamas back to that primordial state of machshava, in which sense there is no created beings, and there is no and the created beings obviously in that sense have no value. And if the created beings have no value, then the hey of yad harama is unnecessary, because it's not necessary to identify that yad rama. And this yad rama, is the yad that is capable of overcoming Amalek. It's the yad that responds to the yad al kisei ka. That when we respond, when we engage in tshuva, what we are doing is saying that although there is the ka, there is the yud ke, and the yud ke is in fact the beginning of creation. It's the opening groundwork for creation. But yad rama is something that transcends creation. It's something that has to do with the Jew, has to do with the Jewish neshama returning to God, and in this sense, it's higher than any component of creation, and therefore capable of defeating Amalek, because it removes this covering that Amalek manages to impose upon creation, that makes it seem like God has separated Himself from creation, and through our tshuva we manage to remove this covering as well. Now, paradigmatic of this is Haman. Right? Haman is the quintessential Amalek. And it says that Haman was ordered by Achashverosh to take the clothing of the king and the horse of the king and to put it on Mordechai. Shmi Amka is the Shasa mitzvahs Laisaseh, and the idea of the Shmiras mitzvahs Laisaseh, of not doing what God tells us not to do, is the idea of avoiding covering over God's name and a revelation of Arein Seif in this world. Whereas the Ramach mitzvahs Aseh is the notion of drawing down divine revelation into this world, of making a dir b'dachteinim, and once we've removed that covering, of making it clear that of revealing God in this world. Now Haman works to cover that. Right? Haman is works to cover the Yudke, and works to cover the source of the mitzvahs leisaseh. And therefore, through Kadiskafi Sitrachra and through Hashab Chasheichel Nahira, we managed to defeat Haman, and we managed to revert his plot. And so Mordechai needs to wear these levushim and needs to sit on this horse. And what he is doing is he is asserting that the levush, so to speak, of mitzvahs are of a much higher source. And so he's physically demonstrating this reality by having Haman walk him. And this is why it says why Haman is ordered to hurry and to take the clothing and to take the horse, because the Gemara says that regarding the contradictory times of when Mashiach is going to come, what the Gemara concludes is that if we are emeritus, the Mashiach's arrival will be hurried, and if we are not, Mashiach's arrival will come in its time. Now, what this means is that when the time for Mashiach comes, Avar Ruach Tomim Min Haaretz, and the Ruach Tomim of Avar Min Haaretz, and Bala Hamavetz Lanetzach, at this point, evil is going to be gone, and there will be no chance to redeem it, no chance to use it for good. At this point, it's going to be completely destroyed. As opposed to, in this time, during the times of Galus, when we can do tshuva, we have the ability to elevate evil, to use evil for good. And it's for this reason that Haman was instructed to hurry and do this. In other words, take advantage of this time of Galus when you can be redeemed, when you can be used for good, as opposed to waiting to a time at which at which point that will no longer be possible. Now, Purim and Yom Kippur have a similarity, as we know that one of the meanings of the word Yom Kippur is that it's the Yom Kippurim, Kamei Purim. And Purim we know is named after the lottery, that Haman threw a lottery that he wanted to mimic the lottery thrown on Yom Kippur. So Haman threw a lottery to see what month to kill the Jews, and he was mimicking the lottery thrown on Yom Kippur to decide which of the two goats is the Azazel and which is La Hashem. That on Yom Kippur we experience a tshuva ilah, as it says, before God you will be purified, and so too on Purim we experience a similar tshuva ilah, that through the fasting and through the crying and through the actual practical Mesiras Nefesh of that time, as it says that Haman was only desirous of killing Jews, but he would have been okay with the Jews having converted, and yet not a single Jew converted. And so the story of Purim is one of absolute Mesiras Nefesh, where Jews continue to maintain their Jewish identity, knowing that this was going to be a guarantee of their death. As it says that in the times of Achashverosh, the Jewish people accepted the Torah beratzon, that during this time the Jews did tshuva, and they ascended, as we mentioned before. They did this proper tshuva ilah, in which they brought their neshamas back to their primordial state, back to the state of machshava, this is reflected in the fact that on Yom Kippur there is no eating and drinking, whereas Purim, which is a galus Yom Tif, Purim has this wine, and has the idea of particularly of being mevatel your das, and in this sense we demonstrate the idea of the machshava being of rising up to machshava, and we demonstrate that the idea of tshuva ilah. And this brings us back to the original pasuk of that opened the mimer, is the meaning of the phrase "Chayv Insh lebesumei b'Poriyah," that a person has to on Purim have this meal, and it says that a person has to drink wine and get drunk to the point that they don't know the difference between cursing Haman and blessing Mordechai. Our Haman, the cursing of Haman, is the idea of covering over God's name through Averis, through Laisase. Baruch Mordechai is the idea of drawing down God through mitzvahs, mitzvahs haseh, which is Vavke. And the wine, which is Mevatel Ar Hasaga, that gets rid of our own ability to differentiate, is an indication of tshuva ilah, which transcends both the aseh and the laisaseh, which goes back to this primordial source. And this says the Alter Rebbe finishes off that Purim reveals this, and that Purim, that a glimmer of this can in fact be revealed every single day when a person does Kriya Shema, and in doing Kriya Shema we say Echad properly, and we dedicate ourselves with proper Mesiras Nefesh and the follow-up of V'ahavta each person according to their abilities.